This is the I Was a Wheelchair Kid podcast. It's true stories of people who grew up using wheelchairs after being paralyzed and how they figured out their lives. I'm your host, Pete Anziano, and I've been using a wheelchair myself for almost 20 years. Although I wasn't injured as a child, I've spent those 20 years in a job where I help people of all ages adjust to living with paralysis. And I have learned that being injured as a kid brings a whole different set of problems. These podcasts are the personal stories about how kids went about finding their own solutions as children. They're adults now, but their childhood memories are powerful. In this episode, Allison tells her story. She's a grown woman now, but she was only 16 when she was injured. Her story is about losing friends and finding them. It began a month before her 16th birthday.
So a month before my 16th birthday, I was involved in a skiing accident where I went off of a ski jump and I landed on my back, and immediately I couldn't move my legs at all. I remember looking down and I couldn't uncross my legs, and being the daughter of a neurologist, I pretty much knew immediately what had happened. After waking up from surgery, my dad was with me and he did confirm what I thought I already knew, which was that I'd had a severe spinal cord injury, and at that point I was paralyzed and had paraplegia. I do actually remember the first thing I asked my dad, though, wasn't about the paraplegia. I already knew that I was paralyzed, and I think when you're young and you're looking forward to the rest of your life, you're thinking about all the wonderful things that you want to do. And there were so many questions of what does that paralysis mean in terms of my larger future. And that's really hard and really scary to ask. The first question I actually asked him was, can I still have kids? I think that that's really surprising to a lot of people. I think there's a lot about spinal cord injury that people just don't know or don't understand. I understood that I couldn't move my legs, but I didn't know what else that meant in terms of how my body was going to function moving forward. And so the only thing I knew how to ask was, can I still have kids? Am I still going to have a family? Am I still going to have a life? What's my life going to look like? And for me, I had always imagined my future involving a family. And so that was one of the questions I had, even if it surprised him. I think he was so shocked he didn't answer it first. And then his second answer was, of course. For women, fertility is unchanged after a spinal cord injury. And so he was like, of course. So I think as a teenager, it's an interesting time in your life. You are transitioning between childhood and into adulthood. And it really is the time where you're trying to figure out, who are you? Where are you going with your life? What do you want to be? Who do you want to be? And how are you going to do that? And so what was hard was that I had my spinal cord injury in the middle of that process of discovery. And I thought I knew what path I was on, and having the spinal cord injury completely changed that. All of the things that I thought were the path that I was traveling was suddenly ripped away from me, and I didn't know what that path looked like anymore.
So Allison's injury had suddenly destroyed her own vision of her future. It was as though she had lost herself, so her path ahead was no longer clear. Even so, she had to decide what was next.
And so for me, you have two choices. You either move forward or you don't. But I also believe that not moving forward wasn't really a choice for me. And so at that point, the choice was, how am I going to move forward? Not am I going to move forward? And for me at the time, getting back to school was my number one goal. And I looked at my future life, the new life that it was going to be. And I can't tell you I knew exactly what it was going to look like, but I knew that education was important to me, and I knew that I needed to feel a sense of normalcy, and not going back to my boarding school, not going back to my friends would have meant losing even more of myself and losing even more of the future I thought I had. And so at that point, that was what I decided was my number one priority. Was I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to be back with my friends. And that felt like something that I could attain. So that was what I put my focus on. I did my rehabilitation and I worked to become independent as a wheelchair user because I knew that I needed that. I asked for my schoolwork to be sent so that I could do it remotely. I read the English books, I wrote the papers, I did phone calls with my teachers, and they were able to help accommodate me so that I could do my work remotely. So I think one of the hardest parts for me at this time in my life was that I had spent so much time focusing on getting back to school, getting back to some sort of normalcy, getting a part of my old life back. My focus and my mission was get back to something that felt like my old life.
But getting back to her old life would turn out to be more difficult than she had ever expected. After all, she was trying to return to her old life with her new self.
Once I got back to school, that didn't necessarily pan out the way that I had imagined that it would. When I got back, I found that a lot of my old friends didn't know how to interact with me, and so it was almost like a loss all over again. At the time, it felt like something was wrong with me. It felt like they didn't like the new person that I was. But of course, to me, on the inside, I felt like the same person. And so it was hard because I felt like I was being rejected because of this one part of me, and that they didn't still love or care about me for the person that I had always been and that I still was. I felt excluded or left out. All of my friends at the time in high school had decided to go out bowling. That was the, evening, weekend activity. And I didn't find out about the activity until they all came back. And I remember being on campus and looking for all of my friends, and I went to all of their various dorms trying to find them, and not a single one was around. And so I went back and spent the rest of the night by myself in my room. And I remember the next day I overheard people talking about the bowling outing that they had all gone to, and I was devastated that I was the only person that had been left out of the activity. And rather than be surrounded by my friends and, do normal human teenager things, I spent the night alone. And I later found out that the reason I wasn't invited wasn't because they didn't want me there, but because they felt uncomfortable inviting me to an activity that they perceived that I couldn't participate in. Nobody asked me how I felt about it. They made the decision for me. And I can tell you that it was much more painful to be left out and not even asked how I felt about it, and to find out about it later rather than have somebody ask me how I felt about it. But even if I couldn't bowl, I still would have gone because I would have wanted to be with them. And even being with people and joining in part of an activity is much less painful than being left out. I would like to say that they learned when I told them I would have rather had been invited than not, but I can say that unfortunately that was just something that continued to happen. There was nothing but pain on my end.
Feeling left out is very common among newly injured teens. It's partly that their old friends just don't know how to react, so they just avoid doing anything without really understanding the pain they're causing. But the pain was very real for Allison. She had to turn her attention to something else.
So when I first came back to school, one of the other things that was very different in my life was sports. So prior to my injury, I had been on the lacrosse team, I was on the diving team, I was on the soccer team. Really being an athlete and a student athlete was a big part of my identity and what I loved to do. And when I got back to school, the school actually originally told me that they would waive the sports requirement for me. And waiving the sports requirement for me was just one more way that I felt they were singling me out or making me different or marking me as this different person that didn't need to have the same expectations as other students. And so I told them, thank you very much, but I will fulfill the sports requirement. And so the first semester, I think I was the team manager for one of the sports teams. And that was a way for me to travel with the team and be with them. But I wasn't the active participant. And that really wasn't going to do it for me. My friend who was living in the dorm with me was on the women's crew team at my school. And she heard me lamenting that I just wanted to be a part of a team again because I loved sports and I loved the competition. And she took one look at me and said, well, you're loud, you're bossy, and you're a great competitive athlete. I don't understand why you don't join the crew team. I looked at her and I thought, well, how am I supposed to join the crew team? I can't row. And she's like, well, of course not. You'll be the coxswain. And so the coxswain is the person who sits in the boat and gets to steer the boat and is the vocal leader of the team. And it's the coxswain's job to keep everybody rowing together, keep them informed where the other boats are. And you really are sort of the quarterback of the team. And when she explained to me what the role of the coxswain was, I immediately perked up and said, that is my role. I can do that.
So, all of a sudden, Allison saw a new path for herself. But was it realistic?
And I'm not sure either of us really thought through the logistics of how that would work, but we were both committed to making it work. And we talked to the crew coach and he said, okay, we're going to do it.
So the coach helped Allison realize the coxswain acts as the brains of the boat. The coxswain is in charge, the leader of the whole team, and there's no way that the coxswain can be left out.
And the first day that I showed up to the bus, which is how we had to get from campus to the boathouse, it was a small school bus type thing that did not have any way to get onto it that didn't involve steps. So I took one look at it and thought, well, that's the end of my coxswain journey. And I was ready to leave, more than devastated. And what was lovely about my coach and the other team members was they didn't bat an eye. They came over. One of them got in front of me, gave me a piggyback ride up the stairs. Somebody else grabbed my chair. We threw it on the bus and off we went to get to the boathouse. Once we got to the boathouse, that was problem number 2. How am I going to get sort of in the boathouse, down the ramp, and next to the boat? At this point, I had become a master at doing wheelies, and so I was able to get down to the actual floating dock, and we figured out a way to get me from the wheelchair down into the boat, and once again, off we went, and that was the first day. I have to credit my wonderful coach at the time. He was a very experienced rower, and he sat me down and really just explained all of the mechanics of it. And he taught me what to say and how to say it and how to lead the team. That's really your job as the coxswain, to understand your teammates, understand what motivates them.
Once Allison got started as coxswain, there was no stopping her. She turned out to be a great success. But that wasn't all. In fact, it wasn't even the best part.
I still lamented the loss of my old friendships, and even to this day wish that I could have stayed close with those people. But I can say that the most beautiful thing about crew was how I found new friendships, and I found a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. And I really do credit joining the crew team with making me feel whole again, making me feel like a valuable individual who could contribute to something and could do something that I loved and could be a part of a team and could do something, quote, normal. And again, at the time, that's all I wanted. All I wanted to do was be with my classmates and be with my friends and get to contribute to a team. And in my case, I really wanted it to be athletics. And again, athletics are not for everybody. but it was such a huge part of my identity before that I wanted it to be part of my identity after. And while it was a new sport that I had originally known absolutely nothing about, I took to it really well and I ended up being good at it. And again, my friend was right. I was competitive, I was smart, I was loud, I was bossy. And so it really was the right choice for me. And it was a great thing for me to be able to do.
They accepted her. Acceptance is one of the most important things for everyone who uses a wheelchair. Not only kids, but adults too.
So throughout my career as a coxswain, I was able to win lots of races and be a part of championship teams, but none of the medals were the best part for me. Being a part of the team and getting to do something that I love doing with my friends, with my teammates, was really the part that has been the best for me. And so while the path that I ended up taking wasn't the one that I thought that I would have taken before my injury, I found something new and beautiful because they accepted me.
As it turned out, marriage and 2 children actually were in Allison's future. Today, she's a highly successful doctor who heads the spinal cord section of a major rehabilitation hospital in America. And by the way, she's still close to those long-ago friends she made on the crew team. This episode was produced by Thea Flom, Stephanie Lolino, and Ann Hambleton. Directed and edited by Dan Lombardi. Music by Cayman Kloss.
And I'm your host, Pete Anziano.
I Was a Wheelchair Kid is a joint project of FacingDisability.com and the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. It's funded in part by a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant directors are Dr. Alan Heineman
And Dr. David Chen.
You can find more I Was a Wheelchair Kid stories on facingdisability.com/podcasts and on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.